Have you ever, like, just completely exploded over something incredibly minor?
All the time. I mean, it's practically a universal human trait.
Right. I mean, genuinely lost your mind over something that, in the grand scheme of the cosmos, is just completely
By
insignificant.
dropping your keys or something.
Exactly. Or, okay, picture this. You're in a crowded parking lot, right? You're trying to navigate your way out.
Always a nightmare scenario.
Total nightmare. You've got your blinker on, you're inching forward, and suddenly this other driver just cuts you off, stops dead, and completely blocks your lane.
Just zero situational awareness.
Zero. And within a fraction of a second, your heart is pounding against your ribs like a trapped bird trying to escape.
Your nervous system just spikes.
Yeah, your hands are gripped so tightly around the steering wheel that your knuckles literally turn bone white. You are just consumed, completely hijacked by this pure, unadulterated, blinding rage.
Oh, I know that feeling so well. It's visceral.
It really is. And then, maybe 20 or 30 minutes later, when you're finally miles away pulling into your own driveway, the adrenaline finally starts to drain out of your system.
And you kind of wake up.
Right. You catch a glimpse of yourself in the rearview mirror and you just think, what on earth just happened? Like, why did a stranger's bad driving make me want to literally go to war?
It is one of the most jarring experiences, isn't it? That incredibly disorienting whiplash between being entirely possessed by a feeling and then only minutes later, your rational brain coming back online.
Yeah, you just survey the wreckage of your own mood.
Exactly. You look around and ask yourself, wait, were we really just preparing for Mortal Kombat over, like, painted white lines on asphalt?
Mortal Kombat over painted white lines. That's the perfect way to frame it. Welcome to our deep dive.
Glad to be here for this one. It's a big topic.
It really is. Today, we are wading right into the deep end of human psychology and the often terrifying reality of our own automated reactions.
The things we do without even thinking.
Exactly. We've been spending weeks poring over this fascinating stack of clinical transcripts, cognitive behavioral research, and psychological case studies specifically focused on the ABCDE model.
Which is such a foundational framework.
It is. And today, our mission is to isolate and interrogate the D in that framework, disputation.
The D, the part everyone gets wrong.
Seriously. Before we go any further, I need to throw a massive disclaimer out there for you listening. Because when I first encountered this research, my immediate assumption was completely, totally wrong.
What did you think it was?
Well, I heard the word dispute, and I pictured like a sterile courtroom in my head where I was the prosecutor, putting my own emotions on the stand.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that sounds exhausting.
It was. I thought it meant basically gaslighting myself into believing I had no right to be angry. I really thought disputation meant forced positivity.
Which is an incredibly dangerous misconception. And it's one that trips up, almost everyone who first encounters cognitive behavioral therapy.
So it's not just me.
Not at all. We hear the word dispute, and we assume we are supposed to go to war with our own feelings. We think we need to cross-examine our anger or our anxiety until it confesses that it's irrational and just vanishes.
Right, like, I demand you stop existing.
Exactly. But if you actually read through the clinical frameworks we're looking at today, that is fundamentally not the goal. We are not here to tell you to just stop being angry.
Thank God.
We are certainly not here to prescribe toxic positivity or tell you to chant happy affirmations while your blood is literally boiling.
Because I can tell you from personal experience, if you tell someone in the middle of a parking lot rage spiral to, just take a deep breath and think positive, you are practically begging to get your car keyed.
Oh, 100%. It feels incredibly condescending.
It feels like a denial of reality.
Because on a physiological level, it is a denial of reality. And this brings us to the first major paradigm shift we really need to make today.
Okay, lay it on me.
Your negative emotions, that sudden burst of rage, that overwhelming wave of panic, they are not the enemy. They are an alarm system.
An alarm system, okay?
Yes, and that alarm system is doing exactly what it was ruthlessly refined to do over millions of years of mammalian evolution.
So it's not a bug, it's a feature.
Exactly. When your heart rate spikes, when you get tunnel vision in that parking lot, your body is functioning flawlessly. It perceives a threat, it floods your bloodstream with cortisol and adrenaline, and it prepares you to survive.
So wait, if the alarm is working correctly, what are we disputing?
Disputation isn't about taking a hammer to the alarm bell so it stops ringing. It's about stepping back, looking at the hidden, rigid internal demands, the code running in the background of your brain, and asking a specific question.
Which is,
Did we actually need to pull the fire alarm for burnt toast?
Let me just stop you right there, because that distinction changes the entire landscape. We're not attacking the emotion. The emotion is just the siren.
Right. It's just a loud noise telling you to look at something.
We are interrogating the hidden demands that actually triggered the emotion. That makes so much more sense.
It takes the shame out of feeling angry.
It really does. So to make sure we don't lose anyone as we dive deeper into this, I want to seamlessly weave in the context of where D fits into this whole puzzle. We're working within this ABC framework we found in the source transcripts.
Let's ground it right back in the reality of the parking lot. In this framework, A stands for the activating event.
The trigger.
Right. It is the objective, undeniable reality of what occurred in the physical world. In your scenario, the activating event is simply this. A vehicle, piloted by another human, pulled into your path and ceased forward momentum.
Okay, phrase like that, it sounds incredibly boring.
That's the point. It is a completely neutral physical occurrence governed by physics and geometry.
Neutral to a robot, maybe. Because immediately we fast forward to the C, which is the consequence. And the consequence is anything but neutral.
So the consequence is chaos.
Total chaos. This is the emotional and physiological explosion. The tight jaw, the sudden desire to scream, the massive adrenaline dump.
Right.
And for a huge portion of my life, I operated under the assumption that A directly caused C. I thought that guy blocked my car, therefore the blocking of the car manufactured my anger. It felt like a direct, unbreakable chain.
And that right there is the core illusion of the human experience.
It's an illusion.
Yes. We perceive the world as acting upon us, and we view our emotions as the inevitable, unchangeable result of those external actions. But the research we're diving into today exposes the invisible middleman.
The B.
The B, the belief. The belief is the internal algorithm. It is the highly subjective lens, the filter, or the specific persona you are wearing in that exact microsecond.
Ah, the personas. We've touched on this concept of personas in our previous deep dives, but it's so critical
It's
here.
the key to the whole thing.
We walk through the world wearing these invisible masks. Sometimes I'm wearing the mask of the authoritative father. Sometimes I'm the enforcer of rules, or maybe the perfect, untouchable employee.
And what the literature points out is that these masks aren't just aesthetic. They come pre-programmed with a very rigid set of operating rules.
Like computer code.
Think of them as complex if-then logic gates. The algorithm dictates, if a person acts in X manner, then it means Y about my status, and I must respond with Z to protect myself.
And this is the battleground, right? This is where disputation, the D, actually enters the fray.
Exactly. Notice where the crosshairs are placed. Disputation does not target the C. You do not dispute the rage. You don't argue with your elevated heart rate.
Because you can't. It's already happening.
Right. You target the B. You attack the rigid demand lying underneath the belief system.
The rigid demand. The must. I noticed this word kept appearing over and over in the clinical transcripts. It's never a suggestion. It's always an absolute.
The linguistic shift is everything. The psychological difference between a healthy preference and a rigid demand is basically the difference between emotional resilience and perpetual misery.
That's a strong statement. Break that down for me.
A healthy preference is flexible.
Yeah.
It allows for the unpredictability of the world. It sounds like, I would prefer it if people followed the directional arrows in the parking lot.
Which is a very reasonable preference.
Totally reasonable. And if they fail to do so, your consequence might be annoyance. You might feel frustrated. But the system doesn't melt down.
Right. You don't want to key their car.
Exactly. A rigid demand, however, leaves no room for reality. It sounds like, people must follow the rules of the parking lot, or else my territory is being disrespected, my fundamental safety is compromised, and my existence is under threat.
Wow. So it's like my brain is running on incredibly outdated software. The code is written in a language that doesn't understand modern context.
Right.
It says, if rule is broken by an outsider, then launch the nuclear codes immediately. And disputation is essentially a prompt popping up on the screen, freezing the sequence and asking, hey, quick question. Do we really need the tactical nukes for a minor traffic dispute at a grocery store?
It's a great analogy, but let's take it even a step further. It's not just outdated software you downloaded accidentally. It is hardware-level firmware.
Firmware?
Yeah, it was installed for a very specific evolutionary purpose. Millions of years ago, if someone encroached on your territory or if a member of a neighboring tribe broke the established social rules of engagement, your survival was literally physically at stake.
Like you could actually die.
Yes. The tribe's cohesion was life or death. The nuclear option, immediate, explosive, violent defense, was the correct and necessary algorithm.
But today...
But today, in the dairy aisle of a supermarket, or trying to merge onto the highway, the algorithm is misfiring.
It's seeing saber-toothed tigers where they're just annoying people.
Precisely. It is taking a biological imperative designed to survive a predator attack or a tribal raid and applying that exact same life or death intensity to a minor social inconvenience.
I see what you're saying. I really do. But here's where my skepticism kicks in, and I think anyone listening right now is probably wondering the exact same thing.
Let's hear it.
If it is just a matter of outdated firmware, why is it so agonizingly difficult to just hit update?
Oh, that is the million-dollar question.
Right. Because if I read this research, I understand the ABC model intellectually, and I recognize that I'm overreacting. So why can't I just smoothly dispute my beliefs in real time and walk away feeling perfectly zen? Why does my brain fight me so hard when I try to calm down?
Because your psyche actively, fiercely, and sometimes viciously defends its own beliefs.
Viciously.
Oh, yeah. You have to remember, your ego has attached its very identity to these personas, to these ancient algorithms. The ego genuinely believes these rigid rules are the only things keeping you safe from total annihilation.
So it thinks I'm trying to kill it.
Essentially, yes. So when you, the conscious observer, step in and start questioning the validity of these rules, the system doesn't say, oh, good point, thanks for the feedback.
No, it freaks out.
It perceives your questioning as a hostile internal threat, and it fights back with everything it has.
It's like the body's immune system attacking an organ transplant. The transplant is there to save the patient's life, but the white blood cells only see a foreign invader, so they try to destroy the very thing trying to heal them.
That is precisely what happens on a psychological level. When your internal algorithm, your rigid demand, clashes violently with the undeniable external reality of a situation, it creates a state of profound friction.
Cognitive dissonance, right?
Yes, psychologists call this cognitive dissonance, but honestly, the term cognitive dissonance almost makes it sound too neat, too intellectual.
It sounds like a mild headache.
Exactly. But this dissonance doesn't just happen in the quiet corners of your mind. It rips through your system on 3 distinct levels simultaneously.
Walk me through the levels.
First, there's the physiological dissonance. Your central nervous system literally prepares for combat. You already mentioned the heart racing and the tunnel vision.
Yeah, the classic fight response.
But depending on the person, it can also manifest as freezing, where your muscles lock up, or hyperarousal, where every single sound is deafening.
Or actually the exact opposite, numbness.
Numbness is a big one.
Because I know I've had situations, especially in intense personal arguments, where I'm expecting to feel angry, but suddenly I feel completely detached. It's like my senses are wrapped in thick cotton. I feel lightheaded, almost floating, and I don't feel anything at all.
What you're describing is somatic suppression. It's often tied to the vagus nerve's freeze response.
So my body is just pulling the plug.
Basically, your nervous system calculates that the dissonance, the sheer volume of conflicting emotional data, is just too overwhelming to process, so it just cuts the main feed. It trips the circuit breaker to prevent the system from overheating.
Wow. Okay, so that's the physiological level. What's next?
Then, layered right on top of that, you have the emotional level. You might feel overwhelming anger or profound, crushing sadness. Or, fascinatingly, you might perform a feigned emotion.
A feigned emotion, like faking it.
Yeah, you might find yourself smiling or laughing inappropriately or acting overly polite when you are actually seething inside. Your brain is generating a smokescreen emotion to mask the internal chaos.
I do that. The awkward, polite chuckle when I want to scream.
We all do it. And finally, presiding over all of this physical and emotional chaos is the cognitive level, the mental gymnastics.
The mental gymnastics. Oh, man. This is the part of the research that honestly unsettled me the most.
It's uncomfortable to look at.
It really is. Realizing what my own brain was doing behind my back to protect its outdated algorithms. This is where the defense mechanisms live, isn't it?
They are wild to observe once you know what to look for. Defense mechanisms are essentially the ego's automated protection software, and we need to reframe how we view them.
Meaning what?
Meaning they aren't character flaws, they aren't moral failings, they are highly sophisticated, automated programs designed to resolve that agonizing, burning feeling of dissonance.
To protect the ego.
To protect your ego from having to endure the humiliation of admitting its core algorithm is wrong. If you want to actually practice disputation, if you want to use the D, you have to be able to spot the ego's blockers.
You can't fight what you can't see.
Exactly. And the clinical material outlines 4 primary defense mechanisms that act as brick walls against disputation.
Let's break these down, because I guarantee every single person listening is going to recognize themselves in at least one of these.
Oh, without a doubt.
The first blocker the research highlights is rationalization.
Rationalization is the smart defense. It's the one we use when we want to feel intellectual about our irrationality.
Like we're logicking our way out of accountability.
Exactly. It is the process of building a highly logical, incredibly sound, airtight case for a completely disproportionate reaction. You recruit your intellect to act as a defense attorney for your rigid demand.
So it's not denying reality, it's just spinning it.
Right. The classic textbook example is the smoker. A person who smokes knows factually that it causes cancer. That knowledge clashes with their behavior, creating massive dissonance.
So how do they resolve it?
The brain rationalizes. It says, well, my grandfather smoked a pack a day until he was 90. Or, I eat organic food and run 3 miles a day, so it balances out the toxins. They build a logical structure to protect a harmful behavior.
Right. But how does that look in the heat of an emotional trigger? Like in an argument?
In our emotional lives, rationalization looks like justifying an explosive, inappropriate temper by framing it as a virtue.
A virtue.
Think about it. You lose your mind at a junior employee for a minor typo. Instead of admitting you lost emotional control, your brain supplies the rationalization.
I'm just holding them to a high standard.
Exactly. If they hadn't been so careless, I wouldn't have had to yell. I am simply the only person in this department enforcing high standards. Someone has to hold the line.
Someone has to hold the line.
Wow.
It sounds so professional, so noble.
But it's a lie.
It's the perfect shield for, I completely lost emotional regulation. You convince yourself you're being a leader when really your algorithm just panicked.
Exactly. Okay, that leads right into the second blocker, which is projection.
Projection. Okay, I have to admit, I experienced a very painful realization about this one recently.
Oh. You tell.
Well, let's define it first so people know what I'm confessing to.
Fair enough. Projection is arguably the most fascinating and the most common of the defense mechanisms. This occurs when the internal dissonance is so unbearable, your ego takes the trait, the desire or the belief that it absolutely cannot accept within itself, and it exports it.
It ships it out.
It projects it onto another human being. You take your own unacknowledged shadow reality and you paste it onto someone else's face so you can attack it out there rather than deal with it in here.
Yes. Okay, so this hits incredibly close to home. I was thinking about a previous manager I had a few years ago. I used to get so unbelievably irritated by him.
What did he do?
It was just a visceral, grinding annoyance. He's totally disorganized. He never planned anything in advance. His desk was a disaster. He flew by the seat of his pants. And I would just fume about it.
You couldn't let it go.
I couldn't. I would complain to my wife. Like, how can anyone operate like that? It's so disrespectful to the team. But as I was reading through this CBT material, I was forced to sit down and actually analyze why his behavior triggered such an outsized reaction in me.
Because other people were probably annoyed by him, but you were furious.
Exactly. I was furious.
And what did the analysis reveal?
It revealed that I have this deeply repressed, chaotic, spontaneous part of myself that I absolutely never let out.
The shadow self.
Yeah. I keep myself in this tight, rigid, hyper-structured little box because I'm terrified of dropping the ball. I'm terrified of being seen as irresponsible. So when I look at his chaos, it wasn't just his lack of planning that was irritating me.
It was your own suppressed desire.
It was my own locked-away, spontaneous self ringing the doorbell, threatening my rigid structure.
Yeah.
I hated it because I envied his freedom to be a mess.
That is a staggering level of self-awareness.
It was not a fun realization.
But it's a textbook definition of projection. You were seeing your own repressed persona reflected back at you in the mirror of his behavior. You weren't fighting him, you were fighting the ghost of your own spontaneity.
And the way you described locking that part of myself away leads us perfectly into the third defense mechanism, repression.
Repression, it always feels like such a heavy Freudian word, doesn't it?
It does. It sounds like something from an old black and white movie. How does it actually function in this specific ABCDE framework?
In this context, repression is the simplest but perhaps the most impenetrable blocker. It's when the true belief, the actual rigid demand, simply gets blacked out by the psyche.
Just deleted.
Not deleted, hidden. It gets locked away in the basement of the subconscious, and the key is thrown away. It doesn't even surface to the conscious mind.
So you don't even know you have a demand.
Exactly. You feel the intense emotion, the consequence burning through your veins, but the belief is completely dark. You have absolutely no idea why you are reacting the way you are.
Because the ego just blocks the camera.
Because the ego has run a calculation and decided that looking at the truth is simply too painful or destabilizing to survive.
You know, therapy circles always use that metaphor of pushing a beach ball underwater. You don't see the ball, but you see the water thrashing around as it tries to pop back up.
Right, the classic beach ball.
But I actually think that metaphor is a bit tired. Reading through the science of this, it feels much more digital to me.
Digital how?
It's like a corrupted file in your computer's operating system. The system knows the file is fatal, so it hides it deep in a system folder you can't even access. The file is still there, taking up massive amounts of memory, making your whole computer run slow, causing the fan to whir incredibly loud.
But when you look at your desktop, everything looks fine.
Exactly. You feel the system lagging, but the root cause is invisible.
That is a much more accurate representation of how the neurology actually handles traumatic or dissonant memories.
Really?
Yes. The prefrontal cortex, the logical desktop part of your brain, literally loses connection to the limbic system where the corrupted file is stored. It's a localized blackout.
That's terrifying.
And if you can't see the file, you obviously cannot dispute it. Which leaves us with the fourth and final major blocker, intellectualization.
Oh, man. I read the description of this one in the source material, and I immediately felt personally targeted.
It is a favorite defense mechanism for people who are highly educated, highly rational, or just naturally analytical. And it is a brilliantly effective shield.
So what exactly is it?
Intellectualization is when you analyze a highly emotional, raw, or vulnerable situation coldly and clinically, specifically to avoid actually feeling the vulnerability behind it.
So you talk about it like a science experiment.
Exactly. You turn a deeply painful human experience into a fascinating data set. You talk about your own heartbreak or your anger or your trauma as if it belongs to someone else.
I see people do this online all the time.
Oh, it's everywhere.
Right.
You study it under a microscope using big psychological buzzwords, so you never actually have to experience the raw, messy ache of it.
It is so insidious because it masquerades as doing the actual work.
Yes. It feels so productive.
You sit there thinking, look at me, analyzing my trauma. Look at me dissecting my childhood. I am so enlightened and self-aware. But really, you're just sitting up in the sterile press box offering color commentary on the game happening down below. You are outright refusing to step onto the muddy field and actually take a hit.
You're using intelligence as a moat to keep the emotion away from the castle.
You are mapping the maze, but you refuse to walk it. And as long as you're intellectualizing, you aren't disputing. You're just categorizing your rigid demands.
Which does absolutely nothing to dismantle them.
It's honestly staggering when you lay it all out like this. Our brains are actively, constantly deceiving us. They hide the truth, project it onto others, build fake logical structures, and detach us from reality.
All just to protect the ego from realizing its internal code is flawed.
It makes you wonder, how do we actually break through this armor? If the system is so heavily rigged to protect the old firmware, how do we ever initiate this disputation phase?
Right.
How do we hack our own firewall?
This is where the clinical material gets incredibly practical. We need concrete tools. We need a way to bypass the security system without triggering a system-wide shutdown.
Okay, give me the tools.
Thankfully, cognitive behavioral therapy provides us with specific angles of attack. The research outlines 3 distinct doors of disputation, 3 different, highly effective ways to interrogate the rigid demand once you manage to identify it.
Okay, the 3 doors. How do we open the first one?
The first door is the empirical dispute. This is where you step into the role of a completely objective auditor. You look at the rigid demand and you ask, where is the evidence?
Like actual hard proof.
Exactly. Is this actually objectively true based on observable reality? You are acting like a scientist demanding hard data. Let's say your rigid demand is, if I stutter during this presentation, I will be fired, my career will be completely over, and I will end up destitute.
Which is a very common anxiety spiral.
Very common. But the empirical dispute does not care about your feelings. It asks for proof. Have you been fired for a minor speaking error before? Has anyone in your department ever been terminated for a single mistake?
Is there actual, measurable, historical evidence that this catastrophic outcome is guaranteed?
Right. And usually the answer is a resounding no. The evidence simply doesn't support the sheer volume of the alarm.
You look at the data and realize, okay, maybe I'll be embarrassed, maybe my boss will give me a funny look, but the catastrophic threat of total ruin, it's a ghost.
It's a phantom threat.
It's like obsessively checking the weather radar and realizing there is no actual hurricane forming. Your internal barometer is just fundamentally broken.
Yeah, precisely. You strip away the catastrophic prediction by demanding proof. Now, if the empirical door doesn't work, maybe there isn't enough data, or the situation is entirely novel, you move to the second door, the logical dispute.
How does the logical door differ from empirical? Aren't they essentially the same thing?
They are cousins, but they attack the problem differently. The empirical door asks, is this a fact? The logical door asks, does this follow?
Okay, what do you mean by does this follow?
It attacks the leap in reasoning. Even if you desperately want a specific outcome, does it logically dictate that the universe must provide it?
Give me an example.
For example, I have worked 60 hours a week for a year. I desperately want my boss to appreciate my hard work. Therefore, my boss must appreciate my hard work, and if they don't, it is an absolute disaster.
I think a lot of people operate on that exact logic.
They do, but the logical dispute steps in and says, wait, follow the logic. Does your internal desire for appreciation biologically, physically, or legally compel another autonomous human being to provide it?
No, of course it doesn't.
Right, it doesn't logically follow. The universe does not owe you reciprocity just because you put in the effort. The logical jump from, I strongly prefer, to the universe is obligated to provide is fundamentally flawed.
It's the arrogance of the demand. We think our desires write the laws of physics.
That's a great way to put it.
We think, I am a good person, therefore bad traffic shouldn't happen to me. It's absurd when you say it out loud, but that is the exact logic our brains run on in the background.
Which brings us to the third door. And in my clinical experience, and based on the transcripts we're studying, this is often the most powerful and transformative of the three. The pragmatic dispute.
The pragmatic door. This one feels the most grounded to me.
It is the most grounded because it bypasses the debate over truth and logic entirely. It asks the simplest, most devastating question. Is holding this belief productive?
Does it work?
Yes. Does it actually help you in this exact moment? Regardless of whether your demand is factually true, regardless of whether it makes logical sense. Is it working for you?
Is it helping or hurting?
Is this specific algorithm helping you achieve your goals, or is it making you miserable, alienating the people you love, and destroying your peace of mind?
The pragmatic door is huge.
Yeah.
Because sometimes you simply can't logic your way out of a feeling. Sometimes the empirical data does look bad.
Exactly. Sometimes life is just objectively hard.
Right. Let me give you a very real, very humbling example from my own life where I had to use this, because it perfectly illustrates how these invisible personas and demands sneak up on us, and how the pragmatic door is sometimes the only way out.
I'd love to hear it.
This happened just a few weeks ago. My son is in his 20s now. He was out on a multi-day hike in the wilderness with some friends.
Okay, setting the scene.
I get a phone call from him, and the connection is absolutely terrible. The signal is breaking up. There's wind in the background. He manages to communicate that they're a bit lost, the trail markings disappeared, and they aren't sure which path to take before the sun goes down.
Okay, let's freeze it there. We have the activating event, the A.
The phone call.
The phone call, the static, the geographical reality of him being lost, and the request for assistance.
Right. So my wife immediately springs into action. She pulls up a topographical map on her laptop, trying to locate their coordinates based on his last known position. I'm on the phone, trying to keep him talking.
Intense situation.
Very. And while we're waiting for the map to load on our end, the silence stretches out.
Yeah.
And in that silence, I decide to offer a little fatherly lesson.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, so in this very calm, measured tone. You know, maybe a good lesson to learn for the future is to always download offline maps to your phone before you go completely off the grid.
You offered unprompted retrospective advice to a person currently standing in a crisis.
I did. I really did. And his response through the static was just a flat, exhausted, okay, and then click. He hung up.
He hung the phone.
Just a flat, okay, and then click. The dial tone echoed in my ear.
Yeah.
And then the quister. The consequence. It was immediate and overwhelming.
What did you feel?
I felt this rush of heat to my face. I felt profoundly humiliated. I felt rejected. And within seconds, that humiliation transmuted into blistering anger.
Because the ego was struck.
Hard. I slammed the phone down, turned to my wife, who was still looking at the map, and I started venting. I was practically shouting, "Can you believe that? How dare he hang up on me? I'm just sitting here trying to help him. He calls me for help and then disrespects me like that."
You were deeply, deeply offended.
I was. The rest of the evening, even after they found the trail and texted us they were safe, I was brooding. I was stewing in it.
The alarm bells were ringing at maximum volume. The dissonance between what you expected to happen and what actually happened was massive. So let's perform the autopsy on this interaction.
Let's do it.
Let's look under the hood. What was the B? What was the hidden belief, the invisible algorithm that took a dropped phone call from a stressed hiker and translated it into deep humiliation and explosive anger?
Well, when I finally forced myself to sit down and analyze it, and believe me, it took some serious time to get past my own ego's defense mechanisms.
Which ones were popping up?
Definitely rationalization. I was telling myself I was just trying to be a good parent. But when I pushed past that, I realized exactly which mask I had pulled out of the mental wardrobe.
Which persona was it?
I had instantly, unconsciously, put on the authoritative, all-knowing father persona. The algorithm running in my head was, I am the father, he is the child, he is lost in the woods, therefore he must need my wisdom, my authority, and my life guidance right now.
There's the demand.
Yes. The rigid demand, the core of the issue was, my son must need my authority, and he must respect my advice in all circumstances.
And how did that rigid demand clash with the reality of the situation on the mountain?
It clashed completely. It was a head-on collision. Because he didn't want a father in that moment. He didn't want a parent giving a lecture on preparation. He is an adult.
What did he want?
He wanted a peer. He wanted a logistical partner on the outside to brainstorm a geographical solution with. He was looking for practical, immediate help, not a condescending life lesson about offline maps while he's losing daylight in the woods.
This is a beautiful, albeit painful, example of the pragmatic dispute waiting to be applied.
It really is.
When you look back at that situation, standing in your living room holding the dead phone, you have to ask the pragmatic question. Was the authoritative father persona productive here? Was it the right tool for the job?
Absolutely not. It was a total mismatch. It was like bringing a sledgehammer to fix a watch.
And did it help you get what you actually wanted, which was connection and safety?
No, it drove us apart.
Yeah.
And the realization, the massive aha moment for me when I applied the D, was that my anger wasn't actually about the phone call. It wasn't about his safety, and it certainly wasn't about offline maps.
What was it about?
My anger was my ego throwing a massive internal tantrum because the specific mask it had chosen to wear wasn't validated by the audience. I desperately wanted to play the wise old father, and he flatly refused to play the helpless child.
That's incredible.
The rejection of the persona is what caused the pain, not the actual event of the dial tone.
Which is such a profound, cutting insight. You realize that the other person, in the dynamic your son, had shifted archetypes. He was operating as an adult, navigating a problem, but you were still reading from a script written 10 years ago.
Exactly. I was operating on old code.
And here is a crucial nuance about disputation that we need to highlight right here. You do not need to definitively prove that your interpretation is the only objectively correct one.
What do you mean by that?
I mean, maybe he was just stressed about being lost. Maybe the battery died. Maybe the signal just dropped. We don't actually know his internal state.
Right. I'm just guessing.
The magic of disputation isn't about finding the one singular objective truth of the universe. It's about opening the door to alternative interpretations.
Introducing doubt.
Exactly. It's about loosening the death grip of the rigid demand so you aren't held hostage by a single agonizing narrative that says, I am disrespected. You introduce doubt to the algorithm.
Loosening the grip. That makes so much sense. It's not about being absolutely certain of the new story. It's about being flexible enough to realize the old story isn't the only option.
Exactly.
But let me push back a little here because I want to stress test this theory. The phone call with my son was highly emotional, deeply tied to identity and family dynamics. It was psychological.
Okay.
But what happens when the threat feels much more immediate, visceral, which brings me right back to the parking lot. Because for me, that was the ultimate test of whether the CBT framework actually holds up in the wild.
Okay, let's return to the crucible of the parking lot. Walk us through the precise anatomy of that moment.
All right, so here is the scenario. I'm trying to leave this unbelievably crowded, chaotic grocery store parking lot. I'm inching down the lane toward the exit.
The tension's already building.
Right. A driver pulls out of a spot, completely misjudges the angle, and blocks my path. We're at a standstill. I look at him, he looks at me, neither of us can move forward. And while we are staring each other down, locked in this stupid standoff, a second driver comes barreling down the lane behind me, going the wrong way, totally ignoring the painted directional arrows on the asphalt, and pulls right up to my bumper.
So you're trapped.
I'm completely boxed in, front and back.
Okay, let's freeze the frame. The activating event. The physical reality. You are physically trapped in a 2-ton metal box by individuals who are actively breaking the agreed-upon spatial rules of the environment.
Exactly. And the consequence.
Yeah.
It was explosive. It wasn't just annoyance. It was primal. My heart rate skyrocketed instantly.
The system is flooding?
My vision literally narrowed. I couldn't see the periphery of the parking lot anymore. I could only see the driver in front of me. I was gripped by this absolute pure rage.
Fight or flight?
In a fraction of a second, my brain generated a dozen different tactical scenarios. I'm going to lean on the horn until it breaks. I'm going to throw the car in park, get out, march over to his window, and scream at him. I was genuinely preparing for a physical altercation.
And physiologically you were. The alarm system is firing on all cylinders. The physiological dissonance is at peak capacity. Your amygdala has bypassed your prefrontal cortex.
I was totally hijacked.
Your body genuinely believes it is in a fight for its physical survival. The cortisol is flooding your system. So in that intense microsecond, what was the B? What were the core beliefs throwing gasoline on that fire?
The beliefs were screaming in my head. People must follow the rules. If we don't follow the rules, society collapses.
The rule enforcer persona.
And even deeper, more primal than that. My territory must be respected. I was here first. I am in the right, they're in the wrong, and I must enforce the justice of this situation right here, right now.
Those are incredibly powerful, rigid demands. They aren't just passing thoughts. They are deeply tied to our evolutionary programming regarding fairness, territorial integrity, and social order within the pack.
They felt like life or death facts.
So in that moment, with the adrenaline literally shaking your hands, how did you apply disputation? How did you manage to bring the D online when the system was crashing?
It was the hardest thing I've done in a long time. It took everything I had to insert just a fraction of a second of space between the impulse to hit the horn and the actual action.
That gap is where the magic happens.
But the cognitive layer, the training from reading these transcripts finally stepped in. I essentially asked a combination of the pragmatic and logical questions. I asked myself, is this an actual physical threat to my existence? Or is this just a threat to my ego?
That right there, that is the million-dollar question of human psychology. Is it a threat to my life or a threat to my ego?
Right. And rationing it out, even through the rage. I knew my life wasn't in danger. The guy wasn't holding a weapon. It was my ego that was screaming, you cannot let them get away with disrespecting you.
Your ego wanted the fight.
Yes. But I realized that leaning on the horn or getting out of the car wasn't going to magically clear the traffic. It wasn't pragmatic. It would just escalate the chaos, potentially cause violence, and terrify my wife, who was sitting in the passenger seat.
So what did you do?
So I made a behavioral choice, which I know we'll talk about next time when we cover E for exchange. I saw a single empty parking spot to my immediate right. I swallowed my pride, put the car in reverse, pulled into the empty spot, and just let the erratic driver pass.
You did it. You successfully disputed the demand, you challenged the ancient algorithm that said you must defend your territory with aggression, and you consciously chose a different, productive path.
I did. And here's the completely honest truth about that moment, and this is why I struggle with this entire framework sometimes.
Let's hear the messy truth.
I pulled into the spot, the guy drove past, I pulled back out, and we went home. The situation was resolved objectively. But for the next 15 minutes, as we drove down the highway, I was still physically shaking.
Of course you were.
My heart was still pounding against my ribs. I was sitting in total silence. But inside my head, I was running through revenge scenarios. I was imagining what I should have said.
The staircase wit.
I was imagining getting out and slamming my hands on his hood. I was still furiously, blindingly angry. And a part of me felt like an absolute failure.
A failure? Why?
I thought, I know all this CBT stuff. I identified the belief. I successfully disputed the belief. I took the pragmatic action. Why am I still so incredibly angry? Why hasn't the tool worked?
I am so incredibly glad you brought this up. I want to jump in and validate this enthusiastically because this is the missing piece of the puzzle for so many people.
Really?
Yes. What you just described, sitting in the car, shaking, angry, running through revenge fantasies, That is exactly what successful, real-world disputation looks like.
You're telling me that feeling like I'm vibrating with suppressed rage for 15 minutes is what success looks like? That feels like a very low bar.
It is success. Because we need to look at the biology. Disputation does not magically delete the negative emotion. It doesn't act as an instantaneous vacuum for the physiological chemicals coursing through your veins.
Because it's biological.
Exactly. In that parking lot, your brain dumped a massive concentrated dose of adrenaline and cortisol into your bloodstream. Those chemicals are physical substances. They have a half-life.
They don't just evaporate.
They take actual time to metabolize and clear out of your organs and your tissue. You aren't failing at cognitive behavioral therapy because your heart is still pounding. Your body is simply taking time to catch up with the realization your mind has already made.
So the residual anger, the physical shaking, the intrusive revenge thoughts,
Yeah.
that's all just the engine cooling down. It's normal.
It's completely normal. The physical alarm is legitimate. What you did, what makes this a massive victory, is that you successfully changed the story that was inflating the anger.
I stopped feeding it.
Yes. The original algorithm, the must, wanted you to escalate. It wanted you to get out of the car, scream, and potentially start a physical brawl in a parking lot that could have ruined your life.
Which would have been a disaster.
Your disputation intervened and prevented that catastrophic behavior. You didn't silence the alarm immediately, because you biologically couldn't, but you stopped pouring gasoline on the fire. You asked, is this threat real enough to act on? And you answered, no.
That completely reframes the entire experience for me. It really does. Because I was holding on to this hidden perfectionist expectation that if I do the mental work correctly, if I apply the D perfectly, I should instantly achieve this Zen-like peace.
The clouds parting.
The clouds should part, and I should feel nothing but love for my fellow man. And when I didn't, when I still wanted to yell, I felt like the tool was broken.
We all fall into that trap. It's the danger of pop psychology. We expect profound psychological tools to work like light switches, instantly turning off the dark.
But we're not machines.
We are complex, messy biological organisms. The mind can pivot in a millisecond, but the physical body has massive momentum. What you did in that parking lot was sever the neurological link between the intense feeling and the destructive action.
I broke the chain.
You allowed the alarm to ring until it naturally ran out of battery, rather than breaking the glass and pulling the lever again and again by screaming at a stranger.
Okay, this brings us to what I think is the absolute core philosophy of everything we've talked about today. The anchor point of all these clinical transcripts.
Laid out.
If we distill all of this, the evolutionary biology of the ABCs, the defense mechanisms of projection and rationalization, the three doors of disputation, and the crucible of the parking lot, what is the ultimate foundational takeaway about disputation?
If you remember absolutely nothing else from this deep dive, if you forget the acronyms and the mechanisms, remember this single truth.
What is that?
You are not disputing the emotion. You are disputing the demand that made it this size.
You are not disputing the emotion. You are disputing the demand that made it this size.
That's the secret.
I'm just going to let that sit in the air for a second. That is profound because it completely validates the human experience. It validates the anger, the sadness, the evolutionary fear, while simultaneously giving us the power to shrink the monster back down to its actual manageable proportions.
Exactly. It returns your agency to you. You aren't a victim of the world. And you aren't a victim of your own feelings. You are simply a programmer debugging a system.
So as always on this show, we want to leave you, the listener, with something incredibly practical. A way to take this abstract clinical theory out of the conceptual realm and bring it into the messy reality of your actual week.
Homework time.
Exactly. Based on the frameworks we've discussed from the cognitive behavioral research, here is your challenge for the next few days.
Pick one single situation from this past week where you felt an outsized, disproportionate reaction. It doesn't have to be a dramatic parking lot confrontation.
It could be tiny.
It could be a passive-aggressive email from a coworker, a slightly weird interaction with a barista at a coffee shop, or a brief 5-minute argument with your partner about doing the dishes.
Right. Think of a moment where the internal alarm felt just a little too loud for the size of the fire.
Yeah.
First, try to name the defense mechanism that showed up to protect your ego.
Spot the blocker.
Were you rationalizing your reaction by pretending you were just enforcing standards? Were you projecting your own insecurities onto them? Were you intellectualizing the argument to avoid feeling hurt? Just spot the armor.
And then once you spot it, apply just one of the 3 disputation angles to the hidden demand underneath. You don't have to use all three. Just pick one door.
The empirical door.
Look through the empirical door. Is there actual hard proof for the catastrophic outcome I'm predicting?
Or the logical door.
Look through the logical door. Does their annoying behavior logically dictate that my entire world is falling apart?
Or the pragmatic one.
We look through the pragmatic door. Is holding on to this rigid belief actually helping me achieve what I want right now?
And here is the most important part of the assignment, especially given what we just talked about. Do not worry about resolving it perfectly.
Expect the messy downregulation.
Don't worry if your heart is still pounding when you think about the email. Don't judge yourself if the anger lingers. Your only job is to identify the angle. Just practice asking the question.
Because once you can see the demand, once you understand how fiercely your psyche defends it, and once you start consistently challenging the algorithm, you create space.
You pry open a tiny gap between the trigger and the reaction.
And that space leads us to the final, transformative piece of the puzzle.
Which is exactly what we are covering next time.
Yeah.
Because once you've interrogated the old software, once you've paused the nuclear launch codes, what do you replace it with?
Next step.
Next time, we dive into the E of the ABCDE model exchange. And we're going to explore why simply chanting positive affirmations in the mirror is scientifically useless, and how to genuinely neurologically integrate a new, productive algorithm that actually holds up under pressure.
It is the crucial difference between merely deleting a corrupted file and actually installing a fully upgraded, resilient operating system.
I cannot wait for that one. We've spent so much time taking the engine apart today, looking at all the grimy gears. It's going to be incredibly satisfying to finally put it back together better and stronger than before.
It really is.
Thank you, as always, for your time, your curiosity, and for willingly wading into the muddy, complex waters of the human psyche with us. We appreciate your attention more than you know.
It has been a pleasure. Remember, the next time that physiological alarm goes off, just take a breath, let the adrenaline spike, and look for the hidden demand.
Farewell until the next deep dive. Keep questioning the code.